So this is just a quick run through of how I work in vray as regards sampling and quality when I'm setting up a scene to render. It's not a full run through on sampling, as there's been kind of plenty of good explanation of those on the forums and on the web of how vray's AA works over the past while. There was originally a really thorough one done by Tony Brantincevich, and then there was a recent one written by Aiken Bilgic as a step-by-step walkthrough of how he does his scenes. Really good explanations in that anyway, so they're well worth checking out. Grant Warwick has done some great stuff over the past while as well, especially on kind of material creation, and also a couple of speed tips for print and stills rendering. So all that stuff is well worth having a look at. So this is just a run through of kind of a simple scene, showing the approach that I take just to try and get kind of clean and predictable results. Yeah, okay, so this is the image that I picked for, some sort of quick kind of reference image or test scene or whatever it is. I like the fact that it only had a couple of materials in it, some pretty simple shapes, and it didn't have that many lights either, so it's going to be fairly easy to put together. What I'll do is I'll just have a look at my final render here. Just load that up. So it's not supposed to be a perfect approximation of the scene, it's just supposed to be something kind of roughly like it. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm not actually going to render a lot of the scenes live, just because they can actually get incredibly slow. Like I was actually kind of surprised at roughly how nasty the scene was to render. So I'm not going to be doing any actual kind of live rendering in front of you here. What I'm going to do is I kind of set off a lot of scenes off to a render farm, just with various different tweaks along the way. So I've saved kind of my history of tweaks with a set of notes for myself as to what I was doing each time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look through the channels of the image just within the vray frame buffer, and just explain why I was kind of doing certain tweaks each time, and what the reasoning was for those with the results that I was hoping to get. So okay, first things first, let's have a look at our scene. We'll just minimize that, and we'll move that out of the way for the minute as well. So this is our scene here anyway. It's just a camera matched version of that photograph, and if we have a look at it from the top view, all we really have is just this room here. So it's nothing else aside from that. It's literally just kind of like a box with another bit of a box at the back of it, and then just kind of like an open window or door just at the side of the room. I've put that kind of inside some sort of other tray type of thing here, so this maybe kind of represents the walls that would be kind of blocking out other bits of light and things like that. There's not an awful lot else within the scene, just a couple of bits of furniture and some light fittings and stuff like that. In terms of lights, we have one dome light that's lighting pretty much the entire scene. This is kind of our main source of illumination. It's quite bright. That's kind of the value that I need to put in to try and get the amount of illumination I want inside inside the room. It's just using a simple color. There's no HDR or anything like that anyway. It's literally just kind of a flat blue color in this case. Yeah, but this kind of provides the main problem for the entire thing. If you're to kind of look at it, this is the height of the window here. It's actually kind of a small space for the light to try and be able to get in, and what's going to happen is that's actually going to make our sampling incredibly nasty later on when we try to actually get this image to work kind of cleanly. So first things first, how do I kind of start things off? Okay, the main point that I kind of think has been, kind of coming up over the past while is that people are not trying to use anti-aliasing to clean up absolutely everything within their scenes anymore, and I think this is probably a good idea. There's kind of two main reasons for this. One of them is because if you're using anti-aliasing, it's kind of going to work over the entire image no matter what. Whereas, like if you've got a small noisy area within your scene, you're kind of increasing the quality of the entire image just to sort out a small portion for it. So I kind of think that's kind of like a tiny bit wasteful in that sense. The second thing is we've kind of, it's been talked about quite a bit over the past while that as you turn up the quality of your anti-aliasing in vray, vray is kind of aware that it's doing a lot of sampling in the first place. So if you've got really high kind of material sampling and really high light sampling and stuff like that, if you turn up your anti-aliasing quality as well, what vray is kind of worried about is that it's just going to start doing nuts amounts of sampling. So what it does is, as you start turning up your maximum anti-aliasing inside of vray, what it does is it tries to divide or turn down the sampling of all the other parts within vray. So as you turn up the quality of your anti-aliasing, your lights, your global illumination, and your materials end up getting effectively the settings of those are turned down. So it's kind of a bit of an odd thing, really, where ultimately, vray is trying to use anti-aliasing to clean up something. It's trying to use anti-aliasing to kind of like clean up materials or lighting. But by you increasing the anti-aliasing, what it's actually doing is, by turning down the settings, it's making the thing that it's trying to fix worse. So it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive in that sense. So, typically what I do with everything is I try to figure out how much anti-aliasing I actually need to use in the first place. So the way that I typically do this is, when I've got my scene made, I just use the global switches to kind of have a bit of a mess around with it. So we can use the global switches here, first of all, to turn off our lights and our shadows. We're going to turn the default lights to on, and then I'm just going to pop in an override material, which is just a flat grey vray material. It's pretty much like a default material. And at the minute I'm just using 1.1 for my anti-aliasing, so this is going to look horrible. Okay, so that was pretty quick because it wasn't doing anything. And yeah, okay, so here we've got loads of problems with kind of jagginess along the edges. Effectively, by setting everything to 1.1, we've turned off the anti-aliasing, so it's, everything is going to be kind of horrible and kind of crisp along the edges there. I kind of think anti-aliasing is for doing nothing else aside from this stuff here, for doing kind of like the edges of my geometry, and later on when I start putting in kind of textures into the scene and things like that, it's to try and make sure that those are kind of like nice and smooth as well. I do a lot of I only work in VFX, so I don't do a huge amount of still rendering. So another aspect that I have to worry about is when things start moving. So if I was to do kind of camera moves through the scene, then things like all of the lines at the back here, you want the anti-aliasing to be good enough so that they don't kind of they don't shimmer, or they don't kind of do any kind of weird kind of crawly looking things. So okay, I'm pretty much always using the vray buffer, and the main reason for that is that we can turn on a load of render elements and we can have a look at those as the render is actually going through. So the nice thing about that is I constantly use all of these different render elements just to see what the quality of my scene is like, just to see is there any kind of noise in my reflections or light or whatever the hell it is. So if I've got the vray frame buffer turned on, it means that I can kind of make decisions about whether my scene is good enough as it's rendering, and if it's not good enough, then I can stop it before the actual frame finishes and I just waste a little bit less time. So it just means that I can make kind of good educated decisions earlier on. So the first one we're going to have a look at is we're going to have a look at the sample rate element. Sample rate element does nothing but show you what your anti-aliasing is doing. So at the minute we have no anti-aliasing really, so this is going to look kind of red really in this sense. So first thing to do is I'm just going to turn up the quality of my anti-aliasing. So I'm going to go from 1.1 up to, let's move that out of the way, go to 1.4. So if I hit render again, okay, cool. Now everything has gotten smoother. Like all the detail over there is a lot nicer. We've got much kind of better results on these lines here at the back. Let's have a look at our sample rate and just try and figure out what this is doing here. So the sample rate element, all it does is it shows you how vray is using its different anti-aliasing levels in the current render. So the red pixels, they always represent whatever this number here is. So Anytime I see red pixels within this image here, it means that V-Ray is going up to this maximum anti-aliasing level here. These are the parts that it's actually kind of having to make a bit of an effort in. The blue bits and pieces at the back, any of the kind of cold colors, they are whatever the minimum setting there is. So if you want to kind of think of it like a heat map, or something like that, something kind of thermal. So there's more activity and hard work done in the brighter, kind of warmer areas, and then there's less happening in the cold areas. So this will always kind of the sample rate, depending on what you do with these values here. Red always represents whatever number you have turned in here. So say for example, if I keep increasing the quality of this, like if I put it up to something like if I put it up to like 50 or something like that and hit render again, what's going to happen here is we don't see any red anymore, which all of this means is that nothing within this image actually kind of needs whatever this top setting of 50 is. Most of the entire thing is kind of cold colors, so it means that most of the rendering is happening kind of closer down to whatever this minimum value is here. If I gradually bring that back, let's try 25, you can kind of see it's still using pretty kind of light blue there, so again, no red pixels. Oh, actually, sorry, we have like 4 or 5 or something like that, so there's like a little bit of high anti-aliasing being done around there. So these pixels are the only ones that are using this max setting at 25 at the minute. Let's go down to 8, which is what I actually used for this image in the end, and then just hit render again. And okay, with this, so we're getting a tiny bit of red in certain places, and that's kind of fine by me. And you have to use two things when you're looking at the quality of your anti-aliasing. The sample rate kind of lets you know whether everything is being done kind of efficiently or not, or whether it's kind of effectively using this range of values you've got here. This is kind of, I think this is kind of good values for the scene here, because it's just using these maximum quality settings in a couple of small areas. So these two values are kind of like a good range for what it actually needs to render the scene properly. And the other thing you got to do is just have a look at the actual kind of like RGB color itself and just see, is this actually good enough to you? Are there any kind of like bits of jagginess in it or anything like that? So this is pretty good for me anyway, so I'm going to stick at this 1.8 value here. So that's the first thing anyway, is trying to figure out how much quality do I actually need for that. I think the easiest way to do that is actually just have a look at something like this setup here, where you've kind of turned off all the materials, you've turned off all the lights. It's literally just going to it's just going to tell V-Ray to just work on kind of like the actual shape of objects and things like that. It's got nothing else to worry at this stage, literally only the geometry. So this is good. So this is the first part here anyway. And I'm going to pause here for a second because I've kept messing this entire thing up trying to record all of this in one go. So back in a second and we'll start having a look at the lights. Okay, right, let's go on to the next thing that I normally do, which is then just turning on the lights within the scene. Typically I first of all, I always try and figure out what anti-aliasing that I need. And the main reason for that is if I go back and change my anti-aliasing afterwards, as we now know, changing your anti-aliasing will change all of the other samplers within your scene. So what I want to do is I want to get my anti-aliasing locked down first of all, and then never come back and change that afterwards, because if I get my lights looking really nice or my materials looking really nice and then go back and change my anti-aliasing, that's going to throw off all of the settings that I had for the lights and the materials, so it can kind of break things afterwards. So I'm going to leave that at 1.8 and I'm never going to kind of touch that again. I am going to mess around with it later on just to try a couple of things out, but for now I'm sticking with that. Let's go on to the next thing. I'm going to leave my override material on, so I'm going to keep everything with this kind of dull grey color here, but what I'm going to do is introduce my lights. So I'll take that on, shadows back on, and turn my default lights off, and I'll just do a quick render. So okay, yeah, you can kind of see here I can switch through all of my render elements as the render is happening here, which is very handy. So I can see I've actually now got lots of problems within my sample rate going through here. I think this render is going to take about a minute or thereabouts. Something like that. Okay, just have a look at some of the elements that I'm using here. Of course, you got your main RGB, so you can kind of see in that you've got loads and loads of grain problems here, so they need to get sorted out. The other ones that I'm using, of course, I'm using the sample rate because I want to find out what my anti-aliasing is doing. We have the raw lighting pass. This is probably going to come in more useful later on when I've got my materials turned on. So if we have a look at the raw lighting now, raw lighting is kind of showing you what it's kind of the equivalent of only what the lights are doing to the scene. So it's as if all of your lights are literally just kind of shining on a scene that has a perfectly white material. So it's actually kind of similar to what we're doing with our kind of override material here. It's very, very similar in that sense. And the other two useful things that I've got is down the bottom here I have two light select elements. So with the vray light select element, what you're able to do is you're able to set up a custom render element, and you're able to pick individual lights to go into each element that you choose. So here I've got kind of two different types of lights within the scene. I've got one for my skylight outside, which is causing all this horrible blue stuff here, and then they have the two lights on the walls as well. So my light selects in this case, I've got one for the walls, which looks pretty okay, and then I have one for the sky as well. So we've got that's the one that has kind of all the noise in it. So okay, let's have a look at our we'll have a look at our sample rate. So we can kind of tell that this sky light here, it's the dome light that's sitting outside, that's kind of the dirty one really. So let's check out our sample rate and see what it says. Now you can kind of see all of the red areas in this kind of correspond with that noise that we're getting in our skylight pass. So what that's indicating to me straight away is that all of these red areas here, once again, they just mean that these pixels here, vray is trying to use as anti-aliasing and work really hard to clean up. So, you know, again, red corresponds to whatever we have in our max here. So all of these pixels here are trying to use like anti-aliasing setting of 8 to try and clean it up. It's not doing a very good job of it. So, you know, that's why we're getting kind of lots and lots of dirt within the actual scene itself. So what we're going to try doing, instead of trying to use anything like anti-aliasing to clean it up, we can kind of tell just by going through our passes that the thing causing all of the problems is the actual skylight here, or dome light outside. And again, I was surprised at how slow this particular scene was, but again, it's got a small window, and you know, the light can only get in through that small window. Like even the little kind of like back garden, the walls that I have around this this little room here, they block off an awful lot of light as well. So it just kind of prevents a lot of the sampling from actually getting in. So this is just a nasty render in this sense. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm literally just going to go to the light. The light is the thing that's causing the problem in the sense, so I'm actually going to go in and clean that up straight away. I'm going to turn up the quality of that. Again, I'm not going to touch these ever again, if at all possible, because I kind of know that to get kind of nice smooth looking edges, these are the settings that I had to use. So I'm going to try and stick with that. So let's pick our dome light for a second. Okay, so if we have a look at the settings for this, we just have the default subdivisions of 8 in that, and 8's probably not really good enough for something like this. This is probably kind of like a pretty complicated light scenario, so ultimately all that's going to happen is the quality settings of this are going to go up. So I'll try doing one render of this with the quality turned up, and we'll just see whether it's whether it's kind of quick enough to look at. So we were at a minute for a render time there. Horrible things are going to happen over the next while, but just stick with me. So with any of these, I kind of think you're you know, there's no point in kind of going from like 8 up to 9 subdivisions. It really doesn't make all that much difference to it. I kind of generally find when I'm doing any quality changes, you're better off like doubling or tripling things. So let's try 16 and do another render again. So now this could, okay, so this is going through pretty quickly. So you can kind of see here, right, for starters anyway, this is getting an awful lot kind of nicer looking. This is maybe kind of like 50% better or something like that, which is great because that's the actual value that we put in there. We doubled the quality of it. Let's again have a look at our sample rate as it's going through. Ooh, okay, so still red. The anti-aliasing is still actually working really hard for it. If we have a look at our raw lighting, we can kind of see that that's definitely better than the stuff that we had over the side here anyway. So you kind of get the idea with this anyway. This is definitely kind of making a big improvement, seeing as we turned it up anyway. What I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start just jumping through some of my pre-saved V-Ray images, because otherwise, like, these renders start to get really slow, and you're not going to be able to hang around to actually kind of sit through a 17-hour render. So bugger that. Okay, and that is done. So that was yeah, a minute up to about a minute 20, but obviously this is still nowhere near good enough. As I say, these renders are going to start getting incredibly nasty, which you will tell when I immediately switch to the next image. So let's double click on this. Each of these V-Ray images, I've got a number here at the start, which is just the order that the images came out in. So this is like the second image. I've got an instruction for what I was doing with it at the time. So this is where I'm cleaning up the lights. I've got a note of my anti-aliasing settings, and I also have a note of the light settings as well. So in this particular case, lights 96 means that the two kind of wall lights here were raised up to a subdivision quality of 96, and then dome is the subdivisions that I was using for the dome light outside. Okay, we've got something kind of horrible here. Our render times are going up to 2 hours and 36 minutes. Obviously that's a huge jump in this sense, but let's double click on it and have a look. Right, okay, cool. So with this, we've gone to a really clean render. Sorry, this is actually the raw lighting pass, but we'll go back to the RGB for a second. But you can see with this anyway, we've got really smooth shadows. We've got loads of kind of nice definition. They're kind of like nice fans coming out of the legs on the bottom of that, so the shadows are really good. The shadows up on the wall are really smooth as well. This little thing here is actually a bulb, I think. When I was moving things around, I made a mess of it, but I was just too lazy to move it, so that's a flaw in it. Okay, it's hugely slow. It's 2 hours and 36 minutes in that sense, but again, we've got a horrible situation here where we're trying to get light in through what is kind of a small window. Loads of people have they've tried to do a situation where they make a box and then they make a small hole in the box and then put a light outside. That's kind of what I have here, and it's a bad situation for kind of any renderers to try and do. It's just not an easy thing to do at all, so that's why it's slow in this sense. So my sampling had to go up to 800 on the dome light to actually get it to come out kind of this clean here. So let's have a look at our sample rate anyway. And now, okay, this is quite pleasant anyway. So again, we've got the same anti-aliasing of 1.8. We haven't changed that, and we won't change that unless I tell you that I did. And same thing again. Now we've got kind of like middle level sampling on these details over here. Again, I would expect that because they're kind of like quite fine lines, so they might be kind of tough to do. We also have some higher anti-aliasing on some of the details down here. Again, this is just really fine, small geometry, so that's what anti-aliasing's job is. It's supposed to get in and kind of work on that stuff there. And then we've got kind of like higher anti-aliasing on the edges of some of the bits here, some of the edges of these planks in the ground. The reason that this stuff has gone up to kind of more of a red color compared to what I had before is just got to do with the exposure. as soon as I turned on the light, we kind of went from something that was flat gray to something that's actually really kind of quite burnt out now at this end. So we've just got a really kind of like a large range of exposure here. So if you've got a really kind of like black area here, or even this shadow here, and if you've got something really bright next, right beside it, that's tough for anti-aliasing to try and work out, because it's trying to smooth the transition or the contrast between these two different areas here, and it has to work really hard to try and get something that looks a bit smooth in that sense. So that's kind of it for the lights in that sense. There's no point in going through loads of steps, because it was literally just me upping the quality, doing a test render, and keeping kind of repeating that process until I got something that I was happy with. So the next one here, what I'm going to do this time around, this is going to be one of the situations where I'm changing the anti-aliasing, is I turned the lights back down to their default 8, and then I tried using the anti-aliasing to clean everything up instead. So I set the anti-aliasing to 1 as a minimum and 100 as a maximum. Our render time dropped down to 25 minutes 48 seconds, so that's roughly 5 times quicker, but let's have a look at it. So, okay, now we've got something that's kind of, it's okay, but it's kind of grainy. So this isn't really kind of good enough in that sense. Let's have a look at our we'll have a look at our kind of light selector for the sky. So, you know, lots of dirt on the wall over there, dirt over here. The quality of this is not good enough, unfortunately, so it's not really kind of working out the way we want. Let's have a look at our sample rate. Okay, so our sample rate is quite a bit different here. Again, we've got a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 100 anti-aliasing samples. So in some of the places, these areas here are kind of where the light is trailing out from, you know, lit areas into shadow or black areas here. So it's having a bit of a struggle with some of these parts here. They're kind of the noisy parts of it. Strangely enough, the floor, it's kind of doing, yeah, it's doing kind of like low level anti-aliasing and some of this stuff here. It's making a bit of an effort, but it's also not very good looking. It's actually still very kind of noisy, so ultimately it's not doing a great job of trying to clean up this stuff here. Again, we know for a fact that the mess is just being caused by the dome light, so you know we're trying to use anti-aliasing to clean up the problems of the dome light, and it just ultimately it doesn't really do a very good job of it. I kind of think in V-Ray you're always best off trying to figure out, okay, what's actually the cause of the noise within the scene, and going in and actually just kind of improving the quality of that. I think anti-aliasing, again, it's going to try and improve the quality of the entire image. So you know, areas that aren't kind of problematic are going to get slower or worse looking, and you're not necessarily going to actually kind of effectively clean up any of the noisy areas of the image. I think you're always better off just identifying what the source of the noise is and then going in and just fixing that, because the good thing is then you're kind of in control of the scene as well. You know exactly where the problems are. So okay, this is kind of it for the light section. Again, I kind of stuck with my horribly slow settings of anti-aliasing 1.8, because again my edges were totally fine. You can see that they're still kind of nice and smooth. There's no problems with the actual geometry, so my anti-aliasing is doing its job well, and my lights are nice and clean, admittedly at horrible expense, because yeah, it's a slow render. It's kind of nasty in that sense. So that's kind of it for lights. Hopefully you won't be looking at kind of as nasty a situation as this. This is literally like the worst render that I think I've ever done, bar a couple of renders that I did when I hadn't a clue what I was doing. So this is just kind of like technically a nasty scene to render in that sense. So that's it for my lights. Okay, so after we are done with our lighting, you kind of have a choice. You can either go into your global illumination or you can go into your materials. I kind of recommend that if you're doing global illumination using brute force, if you're using something that's going to be kind of quite grainy, then I'd probably go on to that next after you've done your lights, and try and kind of again use your raw lighting pass and your sample rate and your raw global illumination pass to try and figure out the sampling of that. In this particular scene here, I kind of knew that I was going to be using irradiance map and light cache, and they always come out smooth. They don't come out with anything that's kind of particularly grainy, so I didn't have to worry about a lot of kind of like noise or anything like that within this here. So the next stage that I went on to with this scene here is I turned on my materials, and now we get more kind of shocking numbers coming through here. So image 4, again I'm sticking at my anti-aliasing 1.8, the same light settings. The materials are the default samples of 8 in this case, and you can have a look at the render time. It's basically 17 hours. Ugh. Right, okay, so we've got something more interesting to look at anyway, but again we've got loads and loads of problems within it. So you can kind of see that we've got loads of noise up the top here, we've got loads of noise on this wall over here, we've got loads of noise on the floor here as well. So the good thing is, again, based on the system that we're using at this stage, we know that our anti-aliasing was good enough for the actual kind of geometry that we had before. We know our light settings are now really clean because we did that before, and we can kind of prove that by we can definitely prove that the lighting is good, because now our raw lighting pass comes into play here. Again, we've turned on our materials, so if we want to have a look at only what the light is doing and kind of ignore what the materials are doing at the same time, we can change over to raw lighting. So if we go to that, it looks like the same pass as we had before. You know, it looks like just the lights acting on a pure white scene. So you can see that this is what the light is actually kind of contributing to the final render. It's still perfectly clean, so no problems with that whatsoever. Now, we've got a couple of speckles coming in up here, which I was not happy about at the time. I actually initially didn't know what was causing them, so I'm going to come back and try and fiddle with those later on. Let's have a look at our sample rate. Our sample rate is gone completely bananas again. We did have a nice clean sample rate before. Now we've got loads of problems in it. So again, with our anti-aliasing, what's happening is you've got loads of areas here where the anti-aliasing is trying to work really hard to clean everything up, and again, not doing a very good job of it. If we go back to our RGB section, because you can see kind of like, you know, lots of noise there, loads of noise there, loads of noise up here, and you can kind of see that the sample rate elements, all of those areas of red kind of correspond with where the noise is in our RGB image. So you can kind of see that, you know, there's something that's happening there that's making the anti-aliaser work really hard to try and clean things up. Again, our anti-aliaser is not doing a very good job of it, as you can see in this render here. So let's go into what is causing the problem. It is the reflection element. So if we go in and have a look at this, again, they're default material settings for all of these shaders here. So it's just using 8 for the quality of the reflections, and some of the reflections are using glossiness. So glossiness is kind of it's a harder, more kind of sampling intensive setting to use, but we're going to use it all the time, so we kind of have to get used to that. Let's actually have a look at what our material settings are like. So if we pick the material for the floor here, for example, it's not overly complicated. So with this particular thing here, literally all I'm using for this actually is just a bitmap of some wood, just in a color correct map. That's all it is there. And then I've just turned on reflections. I've got my glossiness down at 0.65, so that's kind of soft. So that's what's giving us this kind of you know, very, very soft bleeding out of the reflections here. And as I said, the subdivisions are 8. If we have a look at the material for this wood over here, it's kind of similar. It's just a bitmap in the diffuse slot, and then just reflection glossiness of 0.65 again. So kind of quite a soft looking reflection. This material up the top here is this white ceiling material. So that's the same thing again, it's just white and it's got reflection glossiness of 0.9. So it's a bit sharper than the reflections for the wall and for the floor here. So you can kind of see it looks less kind of grainy, but again, it's not a softer reflection, so it's not doing quite as much work in this sense. So our problem now is that our anti-aliasing is okay. Our our lighting is totally clean. So the only thing that we've done is we've introduced some materials. So it's basically the materials causing the problem. You can go to your reflection channel and just have a look at it and go, this is trash. So I need to up the quality of my reflections. Again, going through the default switches, or sorry, the global switches in my render setup here. This actually becomes really handy because without having to edit the scene at all, you can literally just kind of like tick this on and off and switch on your materials on or off. So it comes in very handy for that type of stuff. So yeah, I can kind of use these things here as kind of like quick toggles for the entire scene to change between gray or gray with lighting, or full materials, whatever it is. Let's get that out of the way. Okay, so with this particular render here, again, we know it's very, very grainy in that sense. We've got these three materials here: ceiling, wall, and floor, causing lots of problems. So literally all I do in renders kind of 4 up to 9 is I just literally increase the quality of the materials, and I do nothing else aside from that. So okay, let's go from 4 to 5. So in 5, okay, what I've done here is it says materials to 48. Again, anti-aliasing is the same, lights are the same, dome lights the same. It's the only thing that's gone up is the materials up to 48. Now, okay, when I say materials 48, what I mean by that is it doesn't mean that I put every single material up to a setting of 48. Because some of them don't actually need it. Like even the walls over there, I think that's the wall material, is it? Yeah. So the wall material here, it's got kind of quite a soft reflection, but I think I've turned off ray tracing for this. No, I haven't. Okay, fair enough. Okay, with this here, it's actually kind of not really causing that much of a problem. So that's kind of fine the way it is. Likewise, the reflection on the ceiling here, because it's less blurry than the reflections on the wall and the floor are, this is going to clean up an awful lot quicker than the really kind of soft stuff down the bottom here is. So when I say something like materials 48, it means that the very blurriest materials within the scene got upgraded to 48 subdivs. So it would have been these two here would have gone up to 48. And then kind of less glossy materials, like if you take something like the ceiling, that was at 0.9, so that might have gotten kind of like, halfway there or something like that. That might have gone up to 24 or something like that. So it doesn't, by me saying this, it doesn't mean that every material in the scene went up to this. What I actually do is I have a script that will run through all of the materials in the scene, and it'll look at how blurry the reflections are, and it will give really, really blurry materials a really high level of subdivisions, and then medium blurriness materials, or we'll get kind of like a medium level subdivisions, and then really sharp reflections will get less subdivs, again because it's the softer that something gets, the more subdivs that it needs to actually kind of clean it up. So yeah, again, materials 48 just means that the softest material went up to 48. So let's stop talking crap and let's move up through some of those. So okay, let's have a look at this material or this render here. No, okay, so it's gotten cleaner, but it's still not perfect by any means. But probably the important thing to have a look at is the render time. So our first version of it was 16 hours 55 minutes. We've now dropped that to 11 hours 12 minutes, so we've actually nearly taken 6 hours off the render time just by turning up the quality of our materials. And I suppose this is kind of the worst thing about V-Ray, in that you do a render, and if the render time comes out horrible, the last thing that you think will kind of make things better is actually turning up the settings, because intuitively you'd think that turning up the settings is going to make everything kind of, higher quality but worse in terms of your render time. It's not the case with any of this stuff here. Unfortunately, it's a little bit unintuitive, but you're going to get the hang of it the more times you run through this type of process. Okay, what's happened here? I've upped my material quality. I've dropped a load of render time. Let's have a look at our sample rate and see what that's doing. So still, still lots of red here, so it's still, still problematic. Likewise, if we go into our reflections, still loads of noise over here, still loads of noise on the ground as well. But the only good thing is we've taken 6 hours off our render time, so I'm going to keep doing that trick because it's kind of working for me. I'm going to keep turning up the quality of the reflections. So let's see what the jumps do in that sense. So next version here, version 6, I've put the blurriest material up to subdivisions of 96, and everything else has also gone up in quality as well appropriately. So this time we've dropped down to 9 hours 14 minutes, so we've taken another 2 hours off the render time. Let's leave it on the reflection channel for the minute, because this is the thing that we want to see change ideally. Okay, cool, so that's gotten a good bit better. So this is still noisy, this is still noisy, this is now getting good. This is actually kind of nearly clean enough. So you can kind of see why I'm giving this less kind of importance, just because the reflections are sharper in it, so ultimately it's going to clean up quicker. These guys here, the wall and the floor, are going to still get like the really high setting of 98, or sorry, 96, just because they need it. This is now starting to look kind of good enough anyway. Let's actually have a quick look at our sample rate. Oh, okay, so you can see that that red line has kind of dropped away from this up here. It's nearly good enough. We've significantly less red down there, and a bit less red over here as well, so we're kind of going in the right direction anyway. It means that vray is doing less work trying to clean up the reflections with its anti-aliasing, because we've made the reflections cleaner at the start. We've taken the burden off the vray anti-aliaser by giving it kind of nicer, cleaner reflections to start with. Back to RGB, fine. Okay, so up to version 7. So version 7, okay, our materials have gone up to 128. The render is getting an awful lot nicer. This is still noisy over here. This is nearly good enough, and this is quite smooth up the top there as well. By again changing from 96 to 128, we've shaved another 2 hours off our render time, so that's good. Let's have a look at our sample rate. Okay, so no red on the floor really. Less red over here, so we like that. Let's try that trick again. This time we're going up to materials 200. Okay, not that much of a change in this sense. This is now pretty smooth here. This is pretty okay here. Let's have a look at our sample rate. No red or orange on the floor here, so that's actually kind of not stressing vray out quite as much as it used to. It's still doing a bit, it's still doing kind of like medium level anti-aliasing here, as you can tell by the kind of like green and orange colors along there. That's still pretty dirty. I don't like that, but again, we're getting better. Nice thing is we've shaved an hour off our render time by changing the quality of that up, so that's good. Next one here, okay, so materials up to 400. So again, our floor and our wall go up to 400. The ceiling is probably going up to like, I don't know, 100 or something like that, because that's pretty clean. It doesn't need to go anywhere near 400 at this stage, because it's kind of okay already. So let's double click on that and see what that looks like. Okay, so not that much of a difference. It's starting to get quite smooth in there, which I like. Again, let's check our sample rate, because that's going to tell us what the anti-aliaser is doing. Now we've got something pretty good. Now there's kind of there's like a little bit more anti-aliasing going on the floor here than it is over on this side here, but this is kind of not bad anyway. It's putting in anti-aliasing in the places that are burnt out, which is here, and then this little bar along here. This I still don't like. It actually turns out that this is a different problem than the materials. So I'm going to come back and solve that later on. Here it's a really complicated part of the model, because you get loads of small details, so I would expect that to have kind of quite high sampling on it. And good thing again is we've shaved another hour off our render time. So um, we started off with the materials at 8, and the render time is 16 hours and 55 minutes. I'm lucky in the sense that I had the use of the render farm in Screen VFX. So thank you very much, Ed Bruce, for the use of that. The problem is that if you set off a render and it's like 16 hours or something like that, if you don't make kind of like big jumps in your materials, you might kind of lose faith. Like if you went from materials 8 up to materials 12, it might take like 16 hours to render instead. So you might kind of think to yourself, well, that's kind of the same, or it's similar. Whereas if you make really, really kind of big jumps with the materials, like if you make kind of like a big jump to 48 or whatever, that shaved off like 6 hours. So that's pretty kind of significant. So it's kind of the danger of like, trying to like change your materials by 1 or 2 or something like that. It's not worth it. Go with kind of big numbers, and then try and do tests in like little region renders or something like that instead, because you can kind of see I went from 8 to 48, and then from 48 I kept doubling it effectively. Like I went 48 up to 96, then to 128 to 200 to 400, and I've gone from literally with only changing those values, I've gone from 17-hour render to a 5-hour render. So that's really significant. It's like 3 and a bit times quicker just for changing that one number. So that's pretty good in my book. So our rendering's looking okay at this stage. I'm still not really happy that it's like 5 hours. It's kind of not great, but again, it's a harsh lighting situation here, so hopefully we can get it better. And that's kind of it for our materials in a sense. Yeah, so the main thing with that is same thing again. You can check your raw lighting, make sure that that's still okay at any of these stages here. So that's still kind of quite nice looking. So the lighting is not causing any problems with the noise. And then just check your reflections and just have a look at that and see, do these look clean? So there's actually still a bit of grain in here. There's probably a bit of grain in here as well. But I'm kind of pretty happy with that as a result. And yeah, just kind of like keep tweaking the materials until you kind of clean that up, and you will see that your sample rate will gradually kind of start to look a bit more normal again, with the anti-aliasing only doing the things that the anti-aliasing is supposed to do. Not doing the type of stuff that it's doing over here, like trying to clean up the reflections, because that's bad. So that's kind of it for our materials. Okay, so next one is we're going to go on to our global illumination. So I'm going to go back to my RGB. Again, this is the render from before, just with the materials that are nice and clean. So we're going to go to render 10. Okay, so in this case, I'm just using irradiance mapping and light cache for my GI. So let's double click on that. Nothing else has changed. I've literally only turned on irradiance map and light cache. So, okay, what's going on here then? First of all, anyway, our render time is sped up slightly. It's like 5 minutes quicker. We're very excited about that. But one thing that's kind of helping out is that light cache has a very nice feature which will allow you to use light cache to accelerate glossy reflections. So if I turn on my indirect illumination here and have a look at my light cache, it's this little tick box here to use light cache for glossy rays, so that'll actually speed things up quite a bit, which we do like. Let's minimize that. Okay, so let's have a look through everything again. Now, first of all, I suppose actually let's have a look at our raw global illumination channel to see what that's like. So this is not great, really. Same thing again. You've got kind of a small window for all the light to try and get in, so it's having a bit of a tough time doing that. You can kind of see that everything is kind of speckly and blotchy, so we don't really like that. We're going to have to turn up the quality of our GI. Let's have a look at our sample rate as well. So you can kind of see the blotchiness is kind of starting to influence this area in here as well. But by and large, the sample rate is actually kind of pretty okay in this case. The anti-aliasing again, it's doing like mid-level anti-aliasing over here, which is something I kind of expected. I kind of thought, again, thin lines and stuff like that are going to be always hard for anti-aliasing to work out. What else? Okay, our raw lighting still the exact same as it was before. Got these annoying speckles, which I'll come back to again. And our reflections are pretty much the same as they were. It's actually gotten a bit dirty up on the roof here. Again, the entire scene has gotten brighter, so previously this would just be reflecting kind of like a black shadow or something like that, so you wouldn't see it. Now we've got a brighter scene, so this is getting a bit dirtier. And the floor is still okay, which is kind of nice. There's a bit of dirt here as well, which we don't like. So let's see what we can do with it. Okay, so I'm kind of happy with this, more or less. The only two things that I'm really not happy with in terms of the image is this stuff here looks kind of shitty. There's loads of kind of errors and issues with that, and I also don't really like this kind of like quite jagged looking line here along the top of it. The good thing is, again, once you've got all your channels turned on, you can literally just kind of go through all of the different render elements and try and figure out, okay, where does that problem actually live? So it's probably going to be in either the lighting or the reflections, I would think, at this stage. So let's hop between those two. So if we go into our raw lighting pass, it's pretty smooth along there. There's no real issues here whatsoever. It's actually kind of a similar situation with the top of the chair there as well. That had some problems in the main beauty render or the RGB pass. These look fine here, so it's probably not the light. Let's check out our reflections. So that's where we are. Okay, this is kind of a tough thing to deal with. Effectively, what's happening here is this little kind of like bar on the table is a chrome material, so that's nearly 100% reflective. And what's happening is that is actually seeing a reflection of the brightness of the light, which has again a multiplier of 30. So this is seeing a really bright reflection, and that's kind of a tough thing to deal with. You can either try and darken the light down, but again, that's going to affect the rest of the scene. You can try and turn up the quality of your materials to try and deal with that. You can try and up the quality of your anti-aliasing, but again, as we know now, we don't want to touch our anti-aliasing really, because that's going to, if we up the quality of our anti-aliasing, it's going to turn down the quality of our lighting and our reflections and all that type of stuff, and effectively it's going to muck up all of the stuff that we've kind of worked quite hard to get at this stage. So that's a bit of a problem. It's always a bit of a tough one, and I'm going to look at a couple of different methods to sort that out. It might be the type of area where in compositing you'd add some sort of a little kind of glow on anyway, so you might be able to hide the issue in certain other ways. But what I go through here is okay with this. First of all, anyway, I tried to turn up the lights. So I tried to turn up the sampling on the dome light and on the wall light to try and, first of all, kind of resolve some of the problems that I have over here, and second of all, to see can I get this kind of looking any better at all. So let's have a look at that. So that is no different. Great. And it's also made everything 2.5 hours slower. We've gone from 5 hours up to 7.5 hours, so that's not good. Let's have a look at our elements. So again, reflections, that problem is still there. We don't like that. This is purely a problem of nothing but brightness. What's happening is we've got some kind of like dark areas along the side of it here, and then you've just got right beside it a really, really bright reflection. So this is kind of, it's tough to deal with. There's no efficient, realistic way to deal with it. So most people just kind of cheat with that. There's a new feature inside of vray 3 which would be able to solve this problem without any issues, and it's called max ray intensity. And what that does is for your reflections in the scene, and generally it's reflections that kind of always get these really, really kind of bright, burnt out values. What you can do is you can tell vray to effectively kind of tame some of those really bright values while it's trying to do its sampling. There's another feature in vray called clamp, which is down in your color mapping section. You've got the option of clamp output, and what that's going to do is at the minute this is a reflection of something that's got a multiplier of 30 on it, so it's really bright. If you take it that kind of normal white is 1, the reflection of this is like 30 times brighter than white, so it's very bright. What you can do is if you turn on the clamp option within vray, what it'll do is it'll cut all of the brightness values down to whatever number you have here. So if I was to render with this, what'll happen is my kind of like my white, my really bright reflection of 30 here would get cut down to 1 before vray tries to do any of its kind of sampling and stuff like that. So this would get an awful lot darker looking. It'd go down to just kind of a normal white. So I'd lose like the range of exposure within my image. But it would mean that this edge would be less harsh. Again, the problem with something like this is that it applies to the entire image. So you're going to solve the problem with this, but you might darken everything else in the scene, and it might look as realistic. So we kind of don't really like that. So let's forget about that. Okay, so by trying to turn up the lights, it made no difference to that. So that's kind of not great, really. Let's go to version 12, see what stupid thing I try to do next. Now, okay, right, so this is something that I kind of said that I wouldn't do. I kind of think that, for something like this, like exposure here, you can sometimes try and solve it with kind of better anti-aliasing. Again, it's just kind of a hard thing for something like vray to work on, because you've got kind of a gray surface here, and then you've got these really burnt out bright areas right beside it. So if vray is trying to kind of smooth the transition between these two values here, for starters, it doesn't have an awful lot of pixels to do that over. You can kind of see that it's going from kind of torched out white here, with kind of quite bright values, and then it's only got kind of like 2 pixels to smooth that out into the kind of the gray of the table here. So it's just kind of a bit of a tough one to deal with in that sense. So in the next version of the render, I break my rules and I turn up my anti-aliasing just to see again, can I solve that line there and see can I get any kind of better results here. So let's have a look at that. So that's it. So no, I haven't solved anything at all whatsoever. I think my reflections actually get worse in this case as well. Like the problems up the top here start to come back. Again, if we turn up our anti-aliasing, vray turns down the quality of our lights and our materials. So it hasn't made this better. It hasn't really made this better over here, or sorry, it hasn't solved the problems that I was seeing in my main render. And it's made some of the reflections worse as well. Only good thing is it's dropped the render time, but this is not doing what I wanted to do anyway. Same thing again. I try again to turn up the quality of the dome light to ridiculous levels. Again, trying to solve all of these little kind of like patchy bits here. So I actually changed the dome light settings up to subdivisions of 1600. Now that's something that you can't even do in the user interface. You actually have to use MaxScript to do that. So that kind of gives you a bit of an indication that it's not something that they really intend you to do all that often. So let's have a look at this. Okay, so it has actually smoothed this out a good bit, but our render time's gone up to 12.5 hours, so we don't like that at all. And again, this line along here has not gotten any better at all whatsoever, so bugger, screw that. Let's see, okay, version 14. Okay, here again I'm kind of breaking my rules. I'm going up to AA112, so I'm kind of risking mucking up other stuff in the scene by doing this. Does this make any difference? No, not really. It hasn't made that any better significantly. I still have all the blotchy crap going on there. Render time is 9 hours and 31 minutes, so we had something that was kind of okay when we turned on GI. We had something that was about 5 hours, so we're trying to solve this problem here and this problem here. We haven't been successful, and our render times have gotten worse, so we're probably better off just going back to where we were originally. The next thing that I tried doing is I kind of looked and I went, okay, there's kind of blotchy stuff going on here. Let's have a look at our raw global illumination. So there's some blotchy stuff happening here. and I was thinking, okay, is this actually the cause of my kind of noise and dirt? Again, let's have a look at our sample rate. This is actually, sorry, with the sample rate, this has gotten kind of nicer looking, but it's only because we've turned up the maximum quality to 12 for this render here. So, previously, okay, this had lots of red in it, but we were rendering with anti-aliasing 1.8 at that stage. So we've now gone up to 112, so it's still using kind of like mid to high level anti-aliasing, so that's probably still using something like 8. There's less red pixels in this image, just because again things don't need to use a value of 12 all that much. So our sample rate has changed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our image is kind of better in the sense. The sample rate is just kind of different looking. Let's double click on this image here to see, does upping the GI do any kind of good for us? No, it didn't. Nothing at all. So that's kind of it for that part of the experiment anyway. There is nothing really kind of good came from that anyway. We've made our render time pretty much worse. Like even with this setting here, we're still at like 8 hours 43 minutes, so it's not great by any means. So trying to use anti-aliasing to figure out these problems here didn't work, and it didn't clean up this problem here. So ultimately I would have been much better off staying back at my kind of values of 1.8 and just kind of going along with that anyway. Let's turn back down to that. So this is what we had, and that was 4 hours 55 minutes. So let's kind of return back to something like that. Great. Okay, so on to more bits of fiddling after this. So this is kind of it for the fecking around with anti-aliasing section anyway, which again, none of it worked. So sorry, that's a waste of 13 minutes of your life. Okay, so this was our image where we had kind of the anti-aliasing at 1.8, and we had GI just turned on, render time of 4 hours 55 minutes. So again, pretty horrendous, but it's still quicker than any of the other options that we had when we were messing around with the anti-aliasing. So, okay, where did I go after this? The next version of the render, I went back to my anti-aliasing of 1.8, went back to my lights being 96 and 800, my materials are 400, and yeah, our irradiance map is back down to kind of what it was before. So the next thing that I did is I did this thing called Vlado's Reinhardt trick. So with this particular thing, it actually came up in a discussion on the vray forum about car headlights, because some people were finding that when you try to make an accurate car headlight, what you do is you've got kind of a mirrored housing that sits at the back of the light. You've got a layer of glass in the front that goes that covers over a lot of it, and then you generally put in a really bright light in the middle of it, kind of to mimic the actual bulb that's in the headlight of a car. And some people were finding that when you try to render those, your render of your car goes through pretty quickly, but then when it gets to the section where you've got the headlights, they're horribly slow. They turn really kind of nasty. So those last buckets kind of stick around the headlights of the car for absolutely ages and kind of seem to never finish. Vlado posted a pretty kind of useful trick for that, and it kind of works very nicely for people that do all of their kind of layering and compositing in post, where they don't kind of burn in any kind of gamma bits and pieces into the image. So I'm going to go into my render settings here for a second. Typically this is what most people will use for their color mapping. It's just all the default stuff. So they kind of use the vray frame buffer. They use this sRGB button. Sorry, that's actually off the screen. It's a little sRGB button in the buffer, which does that thing there. And what they do is they don't burn in the gamma of the image itself. They get vray to do kind of like sampling based on an image that you're going to gamma afterwards. So if you're using something like Nuke or After Effects where you're using stuff in linear color, then you're going to be doing this as well. You're not going to be kind of like burning in the brightening into the image itself. You're going to leave it alone. So for people that do that, there's a nice little sneaky trick one of the other color mapping modes in V-Ray is called Reinhardt. And what that's designed to do is it's designed to deal with the kind of the burnt out areas that you've got in an image. So in my case, I've got a couple of burnt out areas. Like I've got some at the top of this couch here. I've got definitely burnt out stuff along the top of this little table here. And I've got some burnt out stuff at the back here. So it's kind of like it's clipping out effectively. So if you change over to Reinhardt, you get this nice thing called the burn value here, and what it'll try to do is it will try to leave all of your image pretty much the exact same, and then just kind of soften off the the burnt out areas of the image. So it's going to gradually bring down the exposure for those burnt out sections and try and bring some detail back into the picture, so it's not just kind of like pure burnt out white. And a nice thing about that is when you do that, it makes it much easier for V-Ray to sample as well. So in the discussion that he had about the car headlights, by doing this little trick, by like gradually bringing down the burn value to something much lower, I think I went with something like that there, it makes it much easier for V-Ray to sample those really bright areas very quickly. So I kind of did this as a bit of a trick just to see what would happen to my image. So let's double click on this VR image and see what it looks like. Now, okay, so first thing you're going to notice is that the image got duller looking. So that's one side effect of it, admittedly. Like I had quite a few burnt out areas within the image, and it's made it a little bit duller. So I've got more detail back in the floor here. The anti-aliasing is less harsh along there and less harsh along the top of this here. I've got some detail back in here, so it's kind of a good thing from my point of view. Like if I wanted to, I could actually just use again, the color correction controls are off screen, so I can't bring them up here. Oh, sorry, I can just do that. If I wanted to put that brightness back into the image, all I'd need to do is in post-production just do some sort of a little color correction curve on it here. So if I darken that down and brighten that up, maybe not darken that down quite as much, I can kind of bring back in that kind of burnt out stuff there. So it's easy enough for me to make that look again if I want to. Let's turn that off. But two good things happened with that. One is that got less harsh looking, and the other good thing is I took 45 minutes off my render time. The last version of the render that we went to was, I think, version 10 actually. So this is the one that we went back to with our kind of AA back to 1.8 after all the useless fucking around with trying to use higher anti-aliasing. So we went from 4 hours 55 to 4 hours 14 just by changing that one thing there, by using that little Reinhardt trick. So you might find if you've got scenes that have a lot of kind of really big differences in exposure in them, so same thing again, like if you've got an interior being lit by light flooding from the outside, whether it's sun or a kind of like bright sky or whatever, you might find that trick will actually kind of speed up your renders an awful lot. Again, it will change the look of it a tiny bit. I'm kind of happy enough with that because I kind of know that I can get my burnt out look again easily in color correction afterwards. So I'll leave it for that. So okay, we're on version 16 here. Again, let's check out our sample rate, see how we're doing. Again, right, this because I turned the anti-aliasing back down to 1.8, again there's more pixels that are using 8 in this particular image here. You can kind of see that, yeah, this is less burnt out than it was. It's still doing, kind of tough anti-aliasing just at the edges there, but the little orange bit in the middle just means that, it's not working quite as hard now. That section there has actually gotten less red as well. I'm still annoyed by all of this stuff here though, so I'm trying to figure out what that is. The other thing of note is that in my raw lighting, I still have all these little bits of dotty crap, which I don't like either. So where do I go from here? Okay, version 16, no sorry, version 17 I should say. what I'm trying to do is at this stage I'm just looking at anything else that can save a little bit more render time. So the Reinhardt trick saved like 40 minutes of render time or 45 minutes or something like that. So I kind of think, well, okay, is there anything else that can help me in terms of exposure that'll make this thing quicker to do? And another thing that'll help in terms of exposure is that clamp value that I tried or that I had a look at earlier on. So again, down in our color mapping, you can turn on clamp, and then I tried setting the clamp level to a value of 2. So it means that I've still got I still got information kind of brighter than pure white, because pure white is a level of 1. So I still have like a little bit of headroom up above that. So let's have a look at what difference that made. So clamp 2, let's double click on this. It made no difference at all whatsoever. It saved 1 minute of render time. We went from 4 hours 14 down to 4 hours 13. Well, actually, sorry, it saved like 35 seconds of render time, so that's not really worth anything amazing. Okay, from 17 to 18. Okay, here again, I'm kind of annoyed by this blotchy stuff here, so what do I do in this case? I change my materials and I change my irradiance map. Actually, I turn up the quality of both of those. So my blurriest materials in the scene have now gone up to 600, and my irradiance map has gone up to using 80 and 30 for its 2 parameters. So that would be the subdivisions here, and the samples here have gone to 80 and then 30. So that'll be the changes that I made there, and let's have a look at that and see what it does. Okay, so it's taken away a lot of the blotching there. There's still some left, so that's gotten better in that sense. Again, I turned up the quality of the materials because I kind of thought, is it noisiness in the reflections of this that's kind of causing some of those problems here. So my render got a whopping 2 and a bit minutes quicker, so whatever, we've been able to turn up the quality of get a better image out and also get kind of a slightly quicker result. So okay, it hasn't made a huge difference, but still it's kind of a positive change in that sense. So if we go into our sample rate, okay, we're getting rid of some of the red that was here anyway. That's gradually kind of starting to vanish, so that's a good thing in my book. If we have a look at our raw light, okay, we still have all those little kind of annoying blotchy things, so that's kind of still annoying me. And in our reflections are all kind of generally pretty good anyway. Like the floor is pretty kind of clean. This is all looking decent over here as well, and yeah, fine. Now, okay, version 19. Version 19 is kind of a big discovery in that sense. What I found out with this is I was trying to figure out, okay, why is the GI having such a problem over here? Why is it kind of looking so kind of blotchy, and why am I getting all of these kind of dots and stuff like that? So I went in and had a look at the actual geometry within my scene. So I'm going to move that out of the way for a second, and let's move this down. So what I found out is I had a look at my main walls, and I had a look at my kind of purple object, which is the kind of beams of wood on the right hand side there, and I found out that the two of them were modeled on the exact same depth. So what's happening here is that the brown bits of wood are effectively fighting with the outside wall of this little kind of room thing here. So effectively what happened here is it was me being kind of crap at 3D in that sense. Ray tracers always freak out when you've got 2 polygons sitting on the kind of the exact same depth or the exact same kind of position. So really what I should have done is I should have just got my wall and done that. So you can kind of see the back of those beams there. They're now separated from this wall here. You couldn't actually see them before because the 2 of them were kind of sitting on top of each other. But the back of this kind of wooden wall section here was sitting on top of this wall here, so it was making V-Ray sad, unfortunately. So, version 19 of this render, actually, yeah, I figured that out, and I fixed that bit of geometry. So let's have a look at what happens when we go to version 19. Let's double click on that. Now, okay, big change happening here anyways, so you can kind of see that that's an awful lot better. Now we have nothing but kind of these really nice vertical lines in it. We don't have any of that blotchy crap that we had before. And another kind of big difference is in version 18 we were at 4 hours 11 minutes, and now we have dropped down to 3 hours and 21 minutes. So we've taken like 50 minutes off our render time. So again, that's actually really significant in that sense. Nothing else has actually changed in this here. I'm still using the same anti-aliasing, same materials, same irradiance map settings and stuff like that. So literally the only thing that I've changed is I've fixed that geometry. So I've stopped being a crap 3D operator. I've done my job properly, and now that looks an awful lot better, and we're much quicker for it. Let's have a look through our channels. First things first, raw lighting. Yay! No more little bits of kind of like dotty crap inside there anyway, so they've all gone away. So basically they're caused by me doing a bad job of the modeling, and it was making the ray tracer cause a couple of errors, and errors with ray tracing generally means things get slower. Let's have a look at our global illumination. This is still actually some blotchiness, but I kind of don't care because I'm really happy at this stage that things are working really nicely. The other thing as well is that this section of wood is pretty dark, so the raw global illumination. Sometimes some of the raw passes can give you a bit of a bit of misinformation, because you look at it and go, oh wait a minute, that's actually really blotchy. But you have to kind of figure out what how V-Ray is going to use this in the final result. So if I have a look at my raw global illumination, it looks maybe a bit blotchy there. But if I have a look at my global illumination channel, which is this pass, but also the color of the walls and all that type of thing added in, it's actually fine. I don't see that much kind of issue there, so I'm kind of okay with that. So where do we go from there? Okay, so with this, I'm kind of thinking the only thing that I maybe don't like about it, if I go back into my raw lighting pass, is that we've got kind of like bits of graininess just on the side there, so that's something that I want to get rid of. Effectively, that's just kind of in the shadows of this thing here. So there's bits of graininess just along the inside of this wall being cast by this wall light. Again, we can use our really useful light select walls for that, and it's not showing it to me. That's very annoying. Unfortunately, the light select pass is not a raw version, so you're not seeing kind of what the light is seeing. You're kind of seeing the light and the colors of the objects at the same time. The light select pass inside of Maya has the option of being a raw light select pass, so that would be an awful lot more kind of useful in this sense. So hopefully Mr. Vlado will give that to us for Christmas or some such. Back to our raw light. So you can kind of see that the shadows are a bit kind of dirty in that sense. So then the next thing that I do is I go, okay, I'm going to turn up the quality of my lights, and I actually turn up the materials a little bit as well. I go from 600 up to 800 on the materials because, sod it, why not? So let's actually zoom in on this area here, and let's double click on this image to see, does it get better? Okay, it gets slightly better. Not hugely, but it does get slightly better. Again, this area here, all of this shadow stuff inside here, you can kind of look at it and go, oh, it's a bit grainy. But then if you look at the, actually, sorry, I don't have the lighting pass here. Let's just go back to the RGB pass. You kind of don't really notice any of that grain. Like, you can actually barely see that shadow that we have on the wall anyway. There's like a little bit of a dark area here, but excuse me, we don't have anything kind of as distinct as this shape here. So the shadow might look bad in the raw pass, but in the full version of the render, you don't see any of that anyway. So okay, that's kind of not that much of a problem for me. So we're getting pretty good with the render at this stage, and the last thing that I do, the last change that I make is actually just change the way that I'm loading in my textures into the scene. Now this is kind of a bit of an interesting trick. I was taught this by Emmanuel Lecce on the forum, and Emmanuel was working on a lot of the VFX for Oblivion last year or the year before. And he kind of found with a lot of kind of detailed textures that he was having issues with the textures either being kind of a little bit noisy if you're using a texture to drive something like your reflection glossiness. He was having sampling issues with those, and he was just kind of finding that they were maybe a bit kind of flickery in certain places and things like that, so he didn't like that. So what he started doing is, rather than loading his textures in just using the bitmap loader inside of 3ds Max, like this one here, typical kind of bitmap there, what he was doing instead is he was using the vray HDRI loader instead of this here. So what he was doing was just using vray HDRI, and he would load his bitmap into this section here. The mapping type he would set to 3ds Max standard, so that's kind of the same as it works the exact same way as the mapping does normally then. But the big difference between the two, as well as a couple of speed reasons that he was getting for other things, is this interpolation that you get with the vray HDRI loader. The kind of equivalent of that with the max bitmap is this kind of filtering section here. So you've got the filtering options of pyramidal, summed area, none, and you've got blur as well. So we're kind of used to these from things like opacity maps, and our textures looking kind of soft as well in 3ds Max with the default blur of 1. Excuse me. Yeah, Emmanuel said he switched over to using the vray HDRI loader and said that the interpolation, even the default one, was much better than the filtering that he was getting with the 3ds Max loader. So literally all I did for the next version of this render here is in the textures that I had in my scene. Again, this was easy because I only had kind of like 4 or 5 different textures. I had like 2 wood textures, I had like a fabric material just for the couch here, and then I don't think there was even any textures on this. So I just switched those over for the fun of it to the vray HDRI loader, and I got this version here. So what I'm going to do is, actually before I switch to that, I'm just going to go to the sample rate. So with the sample rate here, you can kind of see that there's more anti-aliasing happening on kind of like the texture detail of these wooden floorboards here. There's also a bit of there's kind of like medium level anti-aliasing going on the texture of this stuff over here as well. So if I double click on this, you might actually see a bit of a difference on the small detail on the couch as well. Again, yeah, only change that I've made in this version of the render is switching over to that HDRI loader. So let's double click on that. Now, okay, so that's gotten kind of colder looking, and likewise the floor has gotten colder looking as well. So it means for this section here and for this section here, vray is doing less anti-aliasing, so it doesn't have to work quite as hard on this or this to try and clean it up. And if we have a look at our RGB, perfectly smooth. There's no issues with that. Like, those floorboards look absolutely fine. They're kind of nice and solid. There's no jaggedness in them or anything like that. And the cool thing about that as well is we've also managed to save another 21 minutes on our render time. So just by changing that one thing, we've gone from 3 hours 29 down to 3 hours and 8 minutes. So with that, that's kind of a significant difference in that sense as well, which we do like, because again, it's just free speed in that sense. We haven't changed any other parameters aside from that one map loading thing, and everything's gotten an awful lot better. So that's kind of the end of this, really. Again, I was kind of surprised at how nasty the scene was to render. Again, it is kind of quite a tough situation where you've only got kind of a small section for the light to get through, because again, this kind of like door or window thing here, it's not huge, and you've got the walls at the back of the kind of the garden that this building is placed in, kind of blocking a lot of light as well. So it's just tough. It was basically that light that was killing absolutely everything. The dome light that was in the scene was the thing that was kind of doing all the damage. But you can also see that when we were looking at our materials and our lights turned on, first of all, we had a render time of 17 hours, and it wasn't great. And we managed to go from 17 hours for that down to 3 hours with a couple of adjustments within the scene, and we've gotten a much nicer, more solid looking render with better global illumination at like a fifth or like a quarter of the speed or the render time that we had before. So it's an awful lot better. So ultimately, anyway, yeah, that's kind of my approach. First of all, the kind of the standard thing is to make your scene, put your lights in, all that type of thing, and then again, typically I start off no global illumination at all whatsoever, so that's turned off. I go into my global switches, I turn off my lights, turn off my shadows, I set my default lights to on, and then I turn on a gray override material for everything within the scene. And then from that point onwards, I mess with my max subdivisions on my anti-aliasing until I get a good balance of kind of quality of edges within the image, and a sample rate that makes it look like the sampling is only being done in places where it actually needs it. Again, you shouldn't have any kind of areas of high sampling happening in like flat, boring areas like walls or anything like that. Once you've got that, then you can start doing things like turning on your lights and your shadows and turning off your default lights. Check the quality of your lights once you're happy with those, once you've gotten those kind of nice and clean and as quick as you can possibly get them. Then turn on either your global illumination or turn on your materials, and then again only tweak those, because with this process here you're kind of making sure that everything is kind of clean enough at each point all the way along. If you try to turn on everything at the same time, and if you're just kind of like randomly fiddling with things, it'll take you a long time. Because the problem with even if you take a material and a light, if the material kind of like looks a little bit noisy, the problem with it is you don't always know if it's if it's the actual kind of like light being noisy, or is it the reflection of the material being noisy. This type of method here, it just means that you can isolate everything and just kind of break it down to individual things that you can see really clearly. Even with this render here, again, I can just go into my raw light and I can kind of check, is that okay? I can check my reflections to see, are they clean enough as well. You can do all this type of thing, and you can just notice exactly where the problems are. And if you know where the problem is in a scene, brilliant. Then you can actually just go in and turn up the quality of whatever that thing is that's causing noise within the scene, and stop V-Ray from trying to use this anti-aliasing to clean everything up, because that unfortunately does not always give us the quickest results. So that's about it. I'm going to post a couple of links in the comment section of this, and point you towards some of the original articles that I mentioned at the start of the video, and any other kind of discussions that I think were relevant about things like that Reinhardt color mapping trick, or any of this stuff with the vray HDRI loader as well. So that's about it. Hope you enjoyed it or you learned something from it, and yeah, just leave any comments or questions underneath this and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.